Welcome to MYBIOSA's Biology in Life webinar series. This month, every weekend, speakers with decades of experience will share with us their experiences in sustainable farming, food wastage, and aqua farming. In this webinar series, we are looking to highlight fields or topics in biotechnology that are lesser known and have very little to no exposure to the public. I'm Ayappa, I'm a PhD student at Inform USM, and I'll be your host for today's session. This webinar is supported by the Petri Dish, Mavic, GIST, Biomed KL, The Other School, and Surrey.co. The speaker will speak on their topic of interest for roughly about 40 minutes, and then we'll move on to the Q&A for the remaining 20 minutes. Dear viewers, we will also want you to fill in an attendance form for the e-certificates in the link provided in the comment section below. The audience is reminded to post your questions in the comment section also at any time during this session. Okay, so now let's get on to the webinar. Now allow me to introduce to you our speaker for this session, Dr. Chew B. Lynn, a senior lecturer in Universiti Sains Malaysia. She'll be sharing with us about revolutionizing agriculture for responsible farming. I will allow Dr. Chew to introduce herself and dive right into her topic for today. Over to you, Dr. Chew.
Hi, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm actually Lynn from Universiti Sains Malaysia. I'm currently a senior lecturer, and my work basically involves micropropagation and also plant tissue culture for high-value crops. And currently, we are working on figs to introduce a new current, more sustainable kind of farming in Malaysia with the cooperation of IoT. So today I'm going to talk about a topic that a lot of us know about, which is agriculture, but we dive deeper into what are the current changes and also the current modernization into this. So if you have any questions, please do ask me. Okay? I'm happy to answer the questions. You can just chat, you can sort of like type it in the chat box, and also you can basically ask me halfway through. You don't have to wait to the end of the session, right? So we're just gonna like sort of relax a bit and chit chat about what we have in agriculture these days. What are the options available? What are the advances that we have created in the field of agriculture and also plant science? So I'm basically a plant science person. I graduated from the University of Nottingham back in 2011. And I was working mainly on genetically modified tomatoes. So the main aim of my study at the time was to basically incorporate certain flavor modalities into the tomato and assess the gene interactions in the tomato, and then we created our own transgenic tomato in the end. So later on we will sort of like look into it, a few other options in the GN technology here. Right, so the title today is Revolutionizing Agriculture Practices for Responsible Farming. So the main aim here, what I want everyone to know, I think the audience now are generally a lot of students who are taking the field of biotechnology, and some of you might not be certain what sort of like pathway that you want to venture into. So biotechnology is a very large field, it's a very generous field where you can either venture into microbiology, you can also venture into food biotechnology, and one of it branches out into agriculture side. Okay, and why the term revolutionizing is also we want to make small changes. Of course, you don't expect in Malaysia we do large changes to the agriculture sector, but if we can be able to make small changes, we can be able to sort of like reap a larger, more significant benefit out of it. Okay, right. So why food biotechnology or why plant science? You have issues with the world population, and of course, higher number of population also is linked to the requirement of food. The cultivation of food is important, and the production of food is very important when you have higher number of world population. So of course, food availability will also be an issue. And here you can see as time goes by, the young generation would not want to venture into agriculture and food cultivation. They would prefer to move out of the the farms or the outskirts to go to the city to go for other field or other job scopes. But then again, come to think about it, if only the older generations were to farm the food that we eat, then once this generation leaves a particular field, then nobody is going to take up all of this idea of farming anymore. So there will be an issue in the future when food availability and cultivation will be a factor that we have to consider in our life. Okay, so here, of course, poverty and malnutrition is always the issue when it comes to food. You have a lot of when you have higher population, you have high pressure on the quality of life, the food and nutrition. So the idea these days is not about the availability, the amount of food that is being produced, because of course the import and export idea has the import and export concept has it's worldwide, and you can sort of import and export things around the world easily these days. But the problem now is that we face is more on the food distribution. So you get a lot of more developed countries getting food that are that are at higher levels, and sometimes I would say a bit too much. And then you have the poorer countries that are getting all of the lower grade food and at a very insufficient amount. So this is something that we are quite concerned of. And if you talk about food security in the global level, this is actually an issue that we would like to address as people who work in the field of agriculture. So if you talk about plant technology or plant biotechnology, actually, if you speak about breeding, breeding is where you have a certain trait from a certain plant, you want it to be incorporated into other traits. So breeding has its own advantages and also its own limitations. Of course, in this case, if you have a certain trait that you want to incorporate into a certain cultivar or a variety, so a commercial variety. So for instance, if you have a disease resistance cultivar, that you want to incorporate into a commercial variety that is like a large fruited variety. So the common normal breeding techniques is when you cross the pollen and also the female organs for the plants, and you get fertilization occurring, and of course therefore you get the mendalism, where you have the distribution of the genes. Okay, so if you talk about plant breeding there, for you to incorporate a certain trait into a plant, it takes a very long time. For instance, if you talk about paddy, to incorporate certain traits into the paddy, it takes around 10 years for it to be commercialized entirely. So if you see in this image here, you get a desired gene. For example, a gene that is resistant towards a certain virus for the particular plant, and you want to cross to a commercial variety, maybe with a large fruit. Okay, and when you do these crosses, of course you have to do back crosses and all, it takes a long period of time for you to incorporate those genes and establish those genes. And of course, with that, you will also do a very large scale selection based on what you want. Okay. But on the other side, when you have plant biotechnology, you have a desired gene. So you can isolate the gene and you can insert it into the commercial variety via your plant biotechnology methods. And then a new variety will then have that gene only. So if you see during your traditional plant breeding, there are certain traits that you may not want, but you can, via breeding, also incorporating it into your new variety. So for instance, you see this green colored sort of like DNA, and they are all incorporated into the new variety as well. So sometimes this is not desirable, but then it comes together as a package. But for the GM or also your plant biotechnology, you are able to select what kind of genes you want, insert it, and then you get a new variety. Of course, this comes with a lot of work as well. This comes with a lot of limitations and a lot of challenges as well. Both technologies have their own positive sides and also their differences as well. Okay, so what are genetically modified plants? Here, of course, if we talk about GM, a lot of people are afraid of GM. GM here, GM there, and sometimes you are not sure what are GM, whether it is in your food, whether it is in the farm, whether it is available elsewhere, we do not know. How do we trace? Okay, so genetically modified plants or genetically modified food are actually those type of crops that are incorporated with a foreign gene with the assistance or the incorporation of that uses any lab-based technology. So it is not including those that goes through breeding. Even though breeding will incorporate certain genes, but when you have a GM, meaning that you have already done something that is on the molecular level that you insert it. So when you talk about GM is something that as a person who has actually created my own genetically modified food, I am quite certain as a plant scientist what I put inside GM plants. Okay, that the ones that I've created. In fact, I've eaten my GM plants as well. I mean, there were days where I've because I've changed certain taste modalities. So there are days that my supervisor and I can just hang around in the greenhouse and all those tomatoes and taste one by one to see are there differences in terms of flavor compared to the wild type. So I know what are in my and fruits. So I'm not afraid to try them and I'm not afraid to eat them. The thing is that a lot of people you are afraid of things that you are not sure about. What is it all about? So I think as a plant biology person or anyone who's in the field of biotechnology should be able to know what are genetically modified organisms. And I'm not trying to advocate what are GM, but then advocate eating GM food. But then again, as someone who's in the field, you should be able to differentiate to also know what are the safety, what are the issues that are that rises from this GM food. Okay, so in Malaysia, GM food is not entirely available. We are not certain about the origins of some food, some seeds that are imported from countries like um, China and also India and also America. But most of the time in Malaysia, we have a mixture of GM that is already incorporated into our processed food. Okay, they are already incorporated, but we do not know. But if you talk about the United States of America, you can find GM in 80% of the packaged food. And it's in the form of either processed or either fresh. So if you see in this image here, you have it in the 93% of soy grown in the United States are actually GM. And so if we were to import food from the United States, for example, you want to import some soybeans or you want to import some soy milk from the United States of America, high chances they are already GM. And if you are saying, you're trying to say that we do not take GM, that is not true because we do not know where they come from and we do not know if you have already sort of like consume them in your diet. So these are all things that they may be present in some of your food. Okay, your cotton is also GM. A lot of cotton that is grown in the United States is GM. Your canola, which is a vegetable oil, your corn, and then your sugar beet, your papaya, and also your zucchini or your fruit neck squash. So these are all things that are already GM. And in the United States, the acceptance of GM is very high. You get a lot of farmers growing genetically modified crops because to them, growing genetically modified crops at organized level or at a responsible level allows them to cut costs and allows more efficient farming. Why is that so? It's because when you have, for instance, GM crops that have resistance towards certain kinds of chemicals, for example, your Roundup ready, the application of Roundup ready in the field is lesser than the application for Roundup ready that is not GM. So there are certain situations where people talk about the cost efficiency and also the safety. But then again, actually allow GM to be grown in the United States require a big list of testing and also um, testing and also certification. So technically it is quite simple. But then if you talk about the European countries, you get GM that is not accepted. And of course there they are more strict, they are stricter in terms of the rules of cultivation of the crop. So the European countries or the EU, they do not really grow GM. There are two sides to this, and either one, I wouldn't say either one is better than the other, but then there are also good stuffs that comes up from GM actually. Okay, so previously commercialized GM, we talk about the Roundup ready cotton. So Roundup ready means that they have certain genes that can withstand a certain the Roundup ready. So it's a type of herbicide that is applied into the field. So when you apply this herbicide in the field, what it does is it will kill all of wheat, which is of course eating all of the consuming or using up all the nutrients that is used for the plant itself. So when you grow Roundup ready cotton or Roundup ready soybeans, they basically have resistance towards the chemical. And when they have resistance towards those chemicals, meaning that they will survive, and then the field will be free from all of the main very invasive kind of um, weed that may also reduce productivity. And then also you have your BT maize, which is your Bacillus thuringiensis. And these maize will have certain kinds of protein that is genes that is inserted into the DNA. And if you have any insects or any specific targeted insects that come and consume this kind of maize, the insects will basically die, or they will avoid those kind of maize. And of course, with that, you get higher production of maize um, and also a more like productivity is higher. Then again, a lot of people do question the safety of the presence of this protein in the maize. So safety issues comes in as another factor that people need to consider. Then that again, it is something that we have already talked about. Generally, it has to go through a large um, screening process before it can be released to the public. So with that, it is quite assured that the corn or the maize that is grown with this BT gene, this Bacillus thuringiensis gene, generally it is not applicable for the human gut, so you don't have to worry about the safety when it comes to food. But some people will still argue with that aspect. And then we talk about the flavor saver tomato, which is this is the first GM tomato that is available for the public. It was in the US. In fact, my supervisor's supervisor was the one who created this flavor saver tomato. It was canned into a puree version. It was also made into tomato concentrate, and the fruits are also available in the supermarket. But due to certain factors, people at that time the awareness of GM was not. Of course, the awareness was high. At the same time, we have people who are anti-GM as well. So due to some small issues small issues, I would say like less than 1% of people having issues with of course not health issues but diet issues with flavor saver tomato, whole idea has to be scrapped off from the shelf of the supermarket. So it's a waste actually. But then again, when this tomato went straight to the United States, it was accepted very well there, and it was of course grown there, and everything was fine there. It was just that the acceptance of GM in the EU was not overwhelming at that particular time. And even so, having said that, even now, acceptance is also quite low. So with this saver tomato, what you have is a normal tomato would generally grow through rotting and also over ripening after a certain. But for the flavor saver tomato, because the genes have been altered to actually maintain the structure of the cell wall during ripening, and therefore you get the fruit having its firmness and its ripeness up to a very long period of time on the shelf. So this is something that is very valuable as well, because you don't get food wastage, and also you get to allow the food to develop the flavors. So tomato the more you develop the flavor, the more flavorful the fruit is. So sometimes before the fruit can actually develop all of the nice umami taste into it, the fruit has already gone through the ripening and the rotting stage. So with this technology allows you to basically allows you to basically achieve the firmness at the same time achieve the flavor in the fruit. Okay? Then the old school kind of GM actually passed. I mean, it was like basically 30 to 40 years ago. It was being developed, it was being studied. But I think the recent development of GM crops involves more on the nutritional aspects. So, for instance, if you see in this image here, you get the golden rice. So, this is a very novel idea or a novel project where they incorporate the vitamin, the certain kinds of vitamins, in this case vitamin A, into the rice, and the rice turns out to be yellow. So this rice was developed in order for them to treat or to handle, to overcome issues of poverty, number one. Number two, they would like to um, overcome issues of malnutrition in um, poor and developing countries. So this rice generally has vitamin A, and it allows the treatment of blindness in children in poor countries. Okay, and then of course this tomato, this is not a purple kind of tomato. This is already a GM tomato, and is inserted with certain anthocyanin genes. These anthocyanin genes are obtained from berries, which are like very wild berries. Of course certain wild berries, they are very small and they are not like flavorful. So what they do is they took the genes from the wild berries and they insert it into this tomato. When they insert in this tomato, the whole fruit becomes purple. And what they did in this study is they want to encourage the consumption of anthocyanin. In fact, this tomato, they fed it to a bunch of rats who had cancer, and the ones that were fed with this tomato basically had a very significant longer life, the period of being alive, rather than the ones with cancer that were not fed with this tomato died earlier than before. So in this case, they wanted to prove that anthocyanin is also another important diet that you should important component that you should incorporate in your diet, and especially for not cancer treatment, I would say as a diet for cancer patients. This is something that they incorporate in tomato, and because the acceptance in uh, UK, because it was developed in the UK and it was not accepted, GM is not accepted in the UK. And what they did was they took the seeds of this tomato and they export it to the United States. And there they created juice instead and they sold it in the supermarkets. And it was a big hit. And of course, this bananas is another project. It's a very old project, but then it's quite a novel project, I would say. They incorporate the provitamin A into it. Also, the same case to feed the poor in African countries because African kids, African diet consume a lot of plantains and also bananas. So this idea was also a very novel idea to feed and also to nourish the people there. Okay. Then of course the golden rice crisis came in. A lot of people who are anti-GM comes in and try to ruin this idea. But then Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation took they mentioned that this idea they actually funded the project, and they made a claim to say that no one is going to make money out of it. The main aim is to basically tackle the issue of vitamin A deficiency in poor countries. Okay, so when they did a study, they found that a substantial amount of vitamin A can be obtained by eating only 60 grams of the cooked golden rice, which is a very little amount of rice. You are not only feeding, but you also nourish. So this is a very noble project that I would say. I mean, judging on the progress of GM up to now, this is one of the most noble projects that I've seen. And of course, when you have these kind of projects, even though how novel it is, You get people coming in to burn the rice field. You have people coming in to destroy, saying that it is not natural, it is not right. You know, a lot of I would say human rights people would say this is violation of the food that or manipulating the food for the people and all these things. But then again, when you talk about it, you talk about you don't take GM, but natural GM does exist, and it exists in the form of sweet. How scientists actually found the DNA of sweet potato to contain certain regions of the tDNA. So tDNA is actually the agrobacterium. It's a section in the bacteria that transfers DNA, that can transfer its DNA into plants. And it is the same bacterium that we use in the lab to actually transfer our genes that we already know. So in this case, it is very clear that the sweet potato generally has the tDNA region, and therefore it is a GM itself, but it is a GM that naturally occurs in the environment. So you cannot say that you don't take GM. I mean, sweet potato itself is GM. So here, certain things that as a plant scientist and also as a biotech person, you must be able to identify, also try and analyze or think well, what are the advantages and disadvantages, whether or not it is something that is suitable, whether or not it is something that is safe. It is not safe, it's not entirely when you do not know something that is how true it is or how clear it is, you say no for it. You say that it is wrong, it is not right. And it's not right for cultivation. So there are advantages and also there are also disadvantages. Yes. Okay. So of course, when you talk about scientific claims, there isn't any very significant claims or studies being, of course, there are studies being done. There isn't any significant data to prove that GM is dangerous or destructive. So most of it, one or two persons saying they had allergies or issues with it, and then it became viral, and that sort of like put down all of the scientists' hard work, past few years of hard work into the storeroom, just because of one or two or a few claims that says it is not safe. And with that, I mean, as a scientist, I personally feel quite upset if the public say that entirely that it is not safe because we do not have scientific claims to it. Even with scientific claims, people have already proved that it doesn't have much detrimental. Then again, here I wouldn't want to emphasize that it is entirely safe. I would give the decision is up to you as a student or as someone who as a consumer itself. But here, judging from the data that we have, I personally would feel that it is safe to be. So again, when we talk about the availability of it, you have in your corn, your cotton, your soybeans, your sugar beet. A lot of the food that you have in the supermarket is actually already GM. So again, if you import food from the United States, a lot of them are in the form of your glucose, your lecithin, your maltodextrin. So they are present in the soft drinks, your baked goods, your chocolates as well. So if you have chocolates that you bring in from the United States, high chances they already have hidden GMOs in it. Okay, your soups, your crackers, your biscuits, and all. So these basically will contain your maltodextrin, and these maltodextrin are actually obtained from corn, and corn grown in the US is a lot of them are actually GM already. So you are actually taking GM, okay, right? So unless you say that you don't eat anything from the United States, right? Here, so do you have any issues with your health? Just because one or two claims saying that it is not safe doesn't mean that the entire cohort is dangerous. Okay. So here again, GM is found almost everywhere. In Malaysia, I do not know how to trace. I do not know where specifically. You never know the uncle that is growing vegetables in the garden or in the farm actually uses seeds from China, and China import a lot of seeds from anywhere else in the world. And whether it's mixed up, whether or not it is very clearly certified, we are also uncertain. So the distribution of GM in the seeds that we grow in Malaysia is also untraceable. So we do not know whether or not we actually bring GM or not. That's right. And of course, the question is, are these GM? Okay? So the question arises is when you see all of these weird kind of plants in the market, you say, oh, this is GM. Your mom will say that, oh, this is GM, you cannot eat. That is very, very untrue. Okay? Very, very untrue. For instance, you have this carrot. All of these structures that you see that are odd structures, they are basically during when the cell goes through its differentiation, its expansion, and its formation into the structure that we usually know. Sometimes there are gene changes in the cells, and that cause the cells to differentiate in a different direction or different shape. And when it happens, it is natural. It can happen to anyone. It can happen to any crop. And of course, these are all crops or examples of fruits that you do not really see in the market, because in the market they basically have already sort of like selected the nice ones to be sold. But then these are the types of crops that you see when you are actually a farmer yourself. Let's say for me, I grow my own vegetables in my office or outside of my office. There are some cases where you get your carrots or your white carrots growing quite crookedly or at a very odd shape, but they are basically not GM at all. So it's quite safe to eat as well. It's just sometimes the plants go through a few kind of genetic changes. Of course, this corn as well. Okay, these are things that you do not really get to see in Malaysia, but sometimes occasionally you get to see in high-end supermarkets. These are definitely not GM. Because GM, it doesn't really change the structure or the appearance of the plant. You don't see, they look like any other commercial plants. For instance, you have a GM crop and a non-GM crop. They basically look almost the same. It's just what they express in the DNA and also in the cells itself. So here, these are all corn that are bred based on the different kinds of variety that we have. And when they breed this corn, of course, the progeny that comes out from it will have different colors. So these are not definitely not GM. So don't go out and say this is GM and no, it's not safe. Okay, so these are normal. These can occur via normal breed. Then exclude GM. What are the other alternatives to we? Okay, what are the other alternatives do we have if we don't want to grow GM? We don't want to talk about GM. Okay, we don't want to have anything to do with GM. What are the alternatives that we have? Okay, so the traditional farming practices, this is what that is applied in a lot of areas in Japan, where they believe a lot in sustainable cultivation, responsible cultivation. They take time to cultivate the food or the food that they grow, and they are very proud of the produce that grows in the farm. And if you see in this picture, you have old people, doing all of this agriculture, and they are very passionate into it. And one of the reasons why Japanese have a longer lifespan is because a lot of their old people are involved in agriculture. A lot of people love gardening and farming their produce. And not only they are getting very healthy kind of food, but they are also going through a lot of exercise, a lot of sun, a lot of exposure to the environment, the fresh air and all. And in fact, the soil that we cultivate, if you if you care for the soil that you grow your plants on, the soil basically has all of the microbes that can release certain kind of enzymes of course, for humans. Studies have shown that these enzymes generally are antidepressants. So I'm not trying to say that if you have depression or you have any mental issues, you go out and play with the soil. But then this is part of a therapy for the old people in Japan, where they believe that when you work with Mother Nature, you also have a good life out of it. Okay? So actually, this is some sort of my retirement plan where I just want to grow vegetables outside. I think it's fun. Okay, only thing in Malaysia, of course, it's a bit warm. Okay, and then you have your breeding and crop selection. Then you have breeding and crop selection. This one involves a lot of selection of traits. You identify certain traits valuable that are useful. You want to incorporate into a certain variety or a commercial variety. Then you do a lot of breeding. You do a lot of gene selection, gene targeting, and then you have a lot of very high-tech molecular aspects. And from there, you are able to create different varieties where you can, this technology also basically excludes out GM because some of them don't use GM, some of them more of selecting certain traits and they are manipulating the situation or the condition of growth in order for you to favor a certain trait. So this is actually another modernized way of selecting the good traits to be grown in the field. And then you have your conventional propagation methods. This is highly applied in Malaysia when if you have a certain plant, you want to propagate at a large scale for you to grow it in the farms. You have your grafting, where generally you are certain traits. Like the grafting is actually used for durians, where if you have a certain variety that is very good, you use the rootstock. Okay, meaning that you grow a plant that has a very good stock or durian plant that has that is old or whatsoever, but the durian plant doesn't produce very good fruits. What you do is you basically graft the branch of a very good fruited kind of onto the actual plant which is going to be a rootstock. Okay, and this is actually grafting. And then you have your marcotting, which is also another technology where you're trying to induce roots in the soil pack here while it is still on the plant itself. And once the root comes out, you can cut it off and grow it as another plant itself. Okay, and of course you also have your cuttings, which is these are limited to certain kinds of plants. Some plants are very easily propagated via cuttings. So this is another idea or technology that we use. Not technology, it's a very simple gardening idea where you just use the cuttings to propagate plants that you're interested in. But this is only applied to certain plants. Not all plants are able to survive via cuttings. And then this is what I do, which is plant tissue culture. So you have a certain kind of plant of interest, and then you bring it to the lab in a sterile environment. You give the plant certain nutrients, okay, in the media, and from there they differentiate into the different structures. So depending on the type of media and also hormone that you use, they they produce the different kinds of outcomes that you expect. That sometimes you don't expect, sometimes you expect, or sometimes you want. So in this case, if you want embryo culture, a different formula we use. Callus culture, different formula we use. But if you were to propagate a certain plant, we usually go for the organ culture. So meaning that any piece of tissue from the adult plant, we culture them in a certain condition, certain kinds of media, they will multiply the plants for us. And when they are multiplied, you can actually grow them outside just like a normal plant. And this step is what we call the acclimatization. So this is what I do. These are fig plants, fig plantlets, okay? Because fig is not commercially available in Malaysia. They are grown by hobbyists and when you have a lot of farms wanting to plant and make this commercial crop, you cannot be doing this grafting or marketing all the time because it's very the success rate is very limited. So we go into tissue culture to multiply, and if you see from a piece of tissue or a piece of shoot or leaf, you are able to induce production of many other little plants. And from these plants, you then grow them in soil and you can then grow in the farm. And this idea of technology has been used widely for pineapple, for palm oil, oil palm, and also for bananas worldwide. And this is a very classical technology, but it's a very useful technology if you know how to manipulate and also adapt to the plant that you are working on. These are the examples on from one tissue, you are able to multiply them into thousands within months up to a year, rather than if you go through the old method. And of course, this method allows you to exclude all of the disease. For instance, if you do cuttings or marketing, sometimes the disease from the mother plant follows to the progeny, but in this case, we are able to identify and isolate them at the culture level. Okay, so again, you once they are cultured, they are grown outside and they can be grown in the farm. So this is an example of the farm that my students established in USM, where we grow figs. And from tissue culture, they are grown in the soil. And then when they grow in the soil, they start to produce fruits. And in fact, the fruits are even better off than the ones that are cultivated via your cuttings or marketing or the conventional method. So with that, this is an idea on how things flow for plant tissue culture, how we are able to mass propagate and also commercialize certain novel varieties of crops that are available for the public. So, but then again, we talk about organic farming. So, organic farming is a very interesting issue here. Organic farming is also something that I love to do, but organic farming comes with a lot of challenges. A lot, okay. A lot of companies or organic farmers do experience many issues with organic farming because you do not want to kill the insects and also the microbes around the area. But then again, these insects and these microbes come in and invade the whole farm itself. Okay, so there are many methods, many alternatives for them to overcome this issue, but it's a very high cost, it is very costly, it is very labor intensive, and it requires a lot of effort. Okay? So the challenges of organic farming, you get your lower yield because you do not want to apply any chemicals or pesticides or herbicides. Therefore, you get a lot of insects coming to eat them. You get a lot of disease. And if you have a diseased plant, nobody will purchase those kind of vegetables. Okay. And with that, therefore, it is high cost. So you can see in the supermarkets where the organic section is always more expensive than the rest. And then it's labor intensive because you have to always spray your organic fertilizers, your organic pesticides. Okay, they use organic pesticides such as like neem oil, lemon oil, or any other enzymes that they can produce. And the application rate has to be very frequent because if you don't apply it frequently, these pests they will come back and invade at a larger scale. So that is one of the challenges for organic farming where why the price is expensive and how difficult it is to farm these organic vegetables. Yeah, you have a lot of difficulties in controlling pests. Depending on the season that you're working on. Sometimes during the hot climate, you get different kind of pests coming in, and then during the rainy season, different sets of pests will come in, and that can destroy the entire farm and leave you with nothing in the end. So these are the very big challenges with organic farming and the difficulty in obtaining organic seeds. So when you are talking about certification of organic, you need to get your seeds in organic manner. You must also get your soil tested and everything around the surrounding farm tested for organic certification. So these are all the challenges that with that, of course, when you talk about agriculture, you want volume at the same time you want profit. Organic farming doesn't seem to be something that is interesting to farmers. Of course, to consumers like us, if we have the extra cash, we will go for the organic side. But also for the consumers, those who are at, like the B40s or the M40s, you don't look at the organic section. I also don't personally look at the organic section unless it's on sale, lah. Okay, because it is too pricey to afford, and it is also very sometimes you get very irregularly irregularities, okay, in terms of the type of the product itself. Okay? So that is a challenge when we talk about organic farming, and all the organic farmers out there, it is I really salute them for the effort because it's not easy for them to do it at commercial scale. Okay? So practical alternatives, of course, we are talking about alternatives in food farming. Again, you get ideas and modern technologies coming into the picture itself. Um, I personally would like to advocate, you know, agriculture and also farming to the young people. Means when you do on biotechnology, it doesn't mean that you have to work in the lab all the time. It doesn't mean that you have to work in a biotechnology-based company. It can be a company that is agriculture side, but you are incorporating new modern technologies, and with that, it makes agriculture more interesting for the young people to venture into. You know? It's not just for the poorer generation to actually go into it, but as a generation, the younger, more modernized generation, we should be able to come up with ideas and also innovation that improves the quality of life. And this, in this case, quality of our produce, how we farm our food responsibly and also sustainably, so that we are able to not just cater to the market, but also we are giving quality food to the people. This is something that we should start to think about. And with these practical alternatives that we are going to go through later, there are a lot of challenges that comes with it, and there are a lot of research that goes with it as well. So number one, very simple idea, fertigation, where you inject fertilizer and water and the nutrients into an irrigation system. So this is a very old technology, but it works. It works for me. It works for many farms in Cameron Highlands, and it works for many. Okay, so you have a lot of these vegetables being grown in the farm by this method, meaning that you don't have to go and water your plants. The system will automatically water for you, and the system will have all these fertilizers and all the nutrients in the water itself. So this is a very quite efficient, simple yet efficient. Yeah? And then you have your rooftop and urban farming. This is widely applied in countries like in Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and Singapore, where they grow their vegetables on the rooftop, where you get a lot of sunlight, you get a lot of the heat for you to grow your vegetables. And then you have your roofs that are useless, other than people going to hang out there. But how often you hang out on the roof, right? So what they do is they convert these areas into a farm, and it is in fact quite sustainable. It's quite efficient as well. And this is an example of a farm in Korea. And then you do your urban farming. So some developments in, I'm not too sure in Malaysia, but some housing development companies in Singapore and also in Korea, they incorporate an area in the housing development compound for cultivation of vegetables and crops. So that is a very interesting idea, which I hope to see in future in all these urban areas of Malaysia, where you start to grow vegetables and other herbs around the farm. Yeah. And then you have your hydroponics. This is an old technology, but it's still very useful. It has gone through a lot of improvements in terms of the design and also the media itself. And this is where you have the soluble nutrients and all flowing through the roots of the plants, submerged, and the roots absorb these nutrients and produce what they need to produce. This is where you get your tomato farming, efficient for hydroponics. Of course, it's not as labor as intensive as the normal farming that you get, but it is quite efficient. In Holland, they actually do it very well. They grow various vegetables under a big greenhouse, and it is available. Fruits are available throughout the year. Okay, so you don't have to worry about the fall season. And then your salads that can be grown inside the system. Okay, you have your vertical farming, which is another idea, highly publicized in China, where you get your farming done vertically, so it goes outward. This one is basically you have your nutrient flowing through the tubes, and the roots will be subjected to those nutrients at certain intervals. Okay, so this is highly applied for your hydroponics and your aquaponics and aeroponics. So this is a very nice idea. You want to save a lot of space, you do this idea. Okay. Then you have your aquaponics, where you grow your vegetables above, and then you rear fish at the bottom. And this is an idea which is very, very interesting to see, where you farm your fish down there, and then what the fish secretes as a waste product goes as a nutrient for the plant. So it's a very nice cycle and it's a very nice idea. But there are a lot of challenges that goes with it. Of course, here you have to maintain your fish growth. Sometimes the fish um, the feces or actually the organic material that is released by the fish is not suitable for the plant. And the plant are not able to thrive in those kind of environment, and those all of these requires a lot of optimization. Okay. And then you have your aeroponics, okay, where you spray your nutrients in the soil. And then you have your IoT in agriculture. This is modern advancement, where you have your drones and also robotics, where you grow your plants and you harvest them based on your control on the online system. The vertical farming again, you basically subject your plants to different kind of wavelengths in the lab, and also you have a lot of but this is all depending on the type of plants. You can't be doing this on durian plants or any other plants. You can only do this on salads and certain kinds of. So the Malaysian scenario here is what? You have the traditional way of growing plants. Farmers do incorporate a lot of pesticides, a lot of fungicides, herbicides into the plants in order for you to achieve high number or high volume of produce. And this is an article where from the internet, where in UKM what they did was they reported most of the vegetables grown in Cameron Highlands are very highly contaminated with pesticides. And this is an issue that in Malaysia, I think we want to target as well. We want to highlight why are our crops or our produce being rejected by companies in Singapore. Okay, and mainly it's because of these kinds of contamination. Then how? The question is, how do we actually farm our food responsibly? It's very important that if you ask me, I personally, this is my idea of how farming should be in Malaysia. We are not entirely growing into an organic system where you do not use any pesticides or herbicides at all, because that is definitely a different side of production. But here, what we really want is we not only harvest for production, but we also give back to the soil. We also need to give back to Mother Nature. And how do we do it? With composting, where we give back in terms of organic matter, and we also use worms or vermicast. So vermicast is actually an organic material that is released by the worms. Okay, they process all of these food products and all, and they release it in their feces. And this feces is very nutritious to the soil. And this is something that we can start incorporating into our soil, our farms. Of course, then we talk about whether or not we can use pesticides or fungicides. If you ask me, we have to, if we were to use that, we only use it where necessary and whenever it's practical. So meaning that if you do not have that problem or that insect problem, don't apply it and follow the instructions. If it says that apply once in 2 weeks, don't go applying 3 weeks. So these are all the awareness that we must have in our country, in our farmers in Malaysia, where they should be able to generally be educated in terms of safety, and also educated in terms of how we want to keep our environment safe for farming itself. Okay, and therefore, if you ask me, these two methods, this idea has to be in a balance, where you have organic matter being added. At the same time, you also use modern ideas at safety or a safer level. And with that, I would say that Because science has to be practical. You cannot just expect you do something and then tomorrow it will be a big change. It has to be practical to create small significant differences. That's what I always say. You can't be going to an old farmer and say, I want to use drones. That is not practical. That is not doable, I would say, in Malaysia. But if you can just educate the farmer little by little by giving back to the nature, I think that would create a better medium or a better um, solution to how we farm our food responsibly and safe. So, with that, I would like to thank you for listening today. And of course, I open the table for your question and answer. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dr. Chiu. Thanks for the insights on your
Yeah, it's already
sustainable
1 hour.
farming. Yeah, I mean that's what happens. I mean, if you let scientists to speak about what they love,
Yeah,
this exactly what happens. Even if you give any kind of scientist and they start talking about what they love, they just do not know time passing by.
yeah.
But we actually have. Don't worry about it, Doctor. Actually, we
Oh, we
still
have a
have
lot of
time.
questions. Okay.
Yeah, we have questions. So I guess we'll go with the first question here by Mr. Zargam Hussein. So he has a question that can we use them recombinant technology in genetically modified plants?
Again, the question?
Can we use recombinant technology in genetically modified plants in
So
GMO?
genetically modified plants are already being modified technically. So when you have GM plants, okay,
Mhm,
they are generally their DNA has already been modified.
mhm,
For instance, why I would say the term modified is because they have an insertion of a foreign gene. So for instance, if you're trying to incorporate a certain trait from another plant, that particular DNA has already been inserted. So this GM has already a foreign gene in it. So
mhm.
I don't really get the idea why would you want to again modify this, because that will create something that will be a different thing altogether again. But I haven't heard of incidences where you re-modify your GM. So
Okay.
technically, yeah, GM has already been modified. That's the thing.
Okay. All right. So also another question by Mr. Zargam Hussein. He actually asked,
Yeah.
"What are the side effects of GMO?" Which I think you have already covered in your speech just now, but maybe you want to elaborate further a bit.
Oh, sure. The side effects, there are some people who complain. I mean, when they first started out the BT corn and also the Roundup ready crops, there are some cases or some ideas where people develop allergies to it. And they develop allergies and they link it to the consumption of these GM crops. So there the thing is that for science we need significant amount of results and also um, studies to confirm whether it causes allergies or not. So there isn't any much very significant data to prove that the allergies were linked to these GM crops. It could be linked to something else. But then again, the idea of when you have a foreign gene that is, for example, in this the BT, the Bacillus thuringiensis and all, in that particular plant, and we consume those plants, that idea doesn't sing well with some people. They would assume that those proteins that are supposed to kill the insects will have an effect on us. But to those creators of those GM plants, I think they have also thought about this factor, whether or not you want to create something, you don't create something that that at the end of the day it doesn't give any impact, or it will also give safety issues to the consumer. So I think they did a safety test, and the safety test entirely confirmed that it is safe to be consumed. But I guess a lot of people who are anti-GM people, they would start to claim all of those small issues, health issues that they encounter, linked it to your GM crops. That's the thing that it was an issue back in 20 years back, I've noticed. And that basically caused a lot of GM projects that were quite noble was stopped or either were transferred into another project itself, or the objective change altogether as a scientist. So yeah, the side effects, and of course there are a lot of side effects. For example, if you use your Roundup ready crops, a lot of fear came in with super wheat, the issue of super wheat, where some wheat will be resistant towards the Roundup ready, and that has caused a lot of issues with your is wheat having resistance, and it's difficult to control them in certain farms. So that was an issue as well back in I think 10 years back. It was an issue that was discussed in a conference that I attended on GM crops.
Okay.
Okay,
Doctor, we
doctor,
have
we have
another few more
another few
questions.
more
I
questions.
think,
I
is
think,
it okay?
okay? Yeah, yeah, sure, sure.
All right.
All right.
There's a question by Mr. Iyasham Hussein. So he is asking why Japanese are advanced than US in terms of traditional cultivation.
I think if you ask me, Japanese are more advanced in many ways. I mean, all the classical things I mean, precision. They are a civilization that is they has a lot of moral values. They have very high um, motivation towards things. I love this. And they have ikigai. That's one word that I love, which is like they have an aim where they live. So if
Mm,
let's say you are a farmer, they have an attitude where, okay, I'm a farmer, I do it well. No matter whatever I do for farming, I must do it well. And regardless if it's traditional farming, they do it well. And they make sure that they put effort to it. So what I notice with these Japanese people is that they have a very strong sense of togetherness when it comes to trying to advance in certain technologies, and even through traditional cultivation, even with the old people in their country, having that idea of doing things in a very disciplined manner, in a very proper manner, it's in them. And that is how they are more advanced than the US in terms of traditional cultivation. If you ask me. If you ask me as well, the production of cars in Japan itself. I mean,
mhm.
I trust Japanese cars more than any other cars in the world. So it
Okay.
is their attitude of creating something. That is what I see. And even as old as 100 years old, they are still in the farm trying their best to produce the food. And if you see like small documentaries in Japan, even producing like a small batch of mochi to be sold in a in a village, they put
Yes.
so much effort and motivation into it. And that is something that I think a lot of people should start. I mean, I personally would also have to start having this kind of motivation to do things properly. That
Yeah.
is one thing that I see. I observe in the Japanese culture. This is something that is amazing. Lah.
Yeah. They are like, I mean, if you want to compare them to us, we are way behind compared to the Japanese people in terms of how hardworking they are and how motivated they are in whatever they are doing.
Yeah, so you see, for instance, if they fail, this is one thing that also worries me also is in
Mm.
culture. Is that if they fail,
Mhm.
they will definitely take full responsibility towards it. And sometimes,
Yeah.
if they fail over something, they will just give up and that's it, apologize and
Yeah.
walk away from it. So this is how strict they are in terms of their moral values and their determination in doing things.
Yeah. True. True. We'll move on to the next question. Also, again, Mr. Yasham Hussein. He is asking, what do you think about GMO apart from the US to other countries and how advanced they are?
I think in terms of GMO, I think in US in the past 20 years, they have
Mhm.
already accepted it because I think generally they have a large population that they want to feed and they want to tackle the issue of food security. And therefore, when their scientists came up with the idea of GMO, they adapted it very well into their farms. And with that, for us, it's a good thing because we are able to see the advancement, whether or not there are side effects out of these ideas and these creations that they do. And of course, if you talk about plant biology, it is a large field of study. in the US, you have, of course, in Malaysia, you have like what subjects like in USM, you have subjects like what botany,
Yeah.
biotechnology, very
Yeah.
general ones. And
Yeah.
young people in Malaysia, they want to go into something that is very fancy, They want to be
Glamour.
they want to be in the field of like science and plant science or whatsoever. But in
Yeah.
America, there for you to be in the field of plant science,
Mhm.
it's also it's highly sought after as well because they do have a lot of new technologies and new ideas there that could sort of like supply to the support the ideas from the researchers. And the government basically invest a lot of money in the development of crops and also development of the plant science of the field itself. And in America, universities like Cornell University and also a few agriculture-based universities that are very famous, they have a very strong research system there. And if you talk about research, talk about safety, you talk about all of the new ideas, the metagenomics, and also the all of the new systems biology. A lot of them are developed there, and they also invest a lot in other studies on plant science in other countries, and they work very well with people throughout the world. So that's why generally, if you ask me why they are, I personally think it's the openness into the field of science itself. That is what makes them successful in terms of GM.
Hmm. Okay, doctor. I think since we're running out of time, so I think we have another two more questions. Is that okay for you?
Okay.
Yeah. So there's this question. Do you think Malaysia should set up screening facilities or detection policies to determine the status of imported seeds or plantlets?
I think we have. I personally feel that Malaysia has under the, if I'm not mistaken, under MIPI, they have
Okay.
seats that basically comes into Malaysia and also from abroad. Yeah, they are screened, but whether how thorough they are screened or whether or not entirely believe what is on the packaging label, it is not I'm not too certain how they are being screened or I detected in that sense.
Mm,
But then again, if you like for us, you ask me, generally, if I want to buy seeds from China,
yeah.
I can just go to Shopee and just click any seeds that I want. And they
Yeah.
are
True.
sent to my house directly at my
Yeah.
doorstep. I can just grow them. And if let's say the packaging is not clear, it's just that say the seeds, general word seeds.
Yeah.
How do I know that? And for instance, if I can just grow in my farm and if they produce more seeds, I can just grow more of that seeds into another generation into a farm. So establishing plants, uh, I it's also falls back into how thorough we are in terms of screening those plants that come in. I mean, if we were to talk about seeds going into Australia, that's a
Mhm.
big issue. Australia don't allow foreign seeds to enter that easily. But Malaysia, it's something that I I can't comment much for the time being. That's the thing.
Understand. Okay. All right. The next question I think is more to how have you been working? So have you worked with industry players, Malaysia or abroad, to develop GM techs or products in farming or agriculture? And how do the R&D culture differs from academia?
Okay, this is a very quite a good question, I would say.
Mm,
I basically have not worked with any GM product developer in Malaysia because Malaysia we do not. Of course, when you talk about biotech, we haven't reached a level in terms of a lot of biotech is on medicine, a lot on the
yeah.
engineering side, trying to incorporate some ideas and technologies to produce something. We haven't really had like very advanced ideas on plant or
Mhm.
GM directly like Monsanto or like companies that are really works
Yeah.
on R&D GM in Malaysia. Maybe there is, but not much because we are still quite uncertain on the acceptance of GM in Malaysia now. But I have worked with industry players from the UK and Netherlands back when I was doing by doing my PhD. My supervisor actually worked at Unilever. Unilever is a company that produce food, and of course your all these washing products and all that. Your food
Yep.
products like Knorr and all of the other products like food products lah. So there in Netherlands and also in the UK, what they do is they create GM to study a certain gene. So for instance, in my case, my PhD study, it was basically to study certain genes that were linked to flavor enhancement. And that flavor enhancement is actually MSG. So again, here in this platform, I would say MSG is actually safe because it's a naturally occurring substance that you find in food and a lot in tomatoes. So what we did was we tried to improve the amount of MSG in tomatoes. And from there, we identify certain genes that are linked to it. And once these certain genes are linked to it, of course, I can't commercialize my GM plant in the UK. What I did was the Unilever took the idea and they incorporate that particular idea into a breeding program. So they know what sort of genes to target in which kind of tomatoes and which variety and which introgression lines. They basically use it for breeding programs. Breeding programs is natural, okay?
Yeah.
GM is in the lab. So breeding programs, what they did was they tried to incorporate that gene into a larger fruited tomato for them to generate fruits that are naturally occurring, okay, like biobreeding, and also have higher levels of MSG in it. So they can add it into their food products or use that tomato for their sauces and also their pasta sauces without having the term having the without with the addition of the label no added MSG. Because a lot of people think MSG is not good and all these things, so you don't add, but they are in a natural form. So this is how the European countries adapt to the idea of GM. GM for them is just a model for them to test the gene rather than they commercialize the GM itself.
Okay. Yeah.
This is how they maneuver the whole idea into changing the agriculture side for the EU section. But then again, like in the anthocyanin tomato, the purple tomatoes I showed in a few just now,
Yeah.
those tomatoes, what they did was they took it, I think, they had a collaboration with a few universities in the US, and they took that idea to the United States. And instead of doing like what I did, what my project did, they actually commercialized that tomato and they make it into fruit juice, which is like purple tomato juice. And it's GM. So it's depends on who you work with and which sort of company that you're associated to. They will know how to plan for the project if it's a novel project.
Okay. Yeah. I think the thing with us is just that we don't have proper, what do you say, awareness towards GMO. And I think that is something that we really need to work on. But okay, so before we leave you, can we have like a last few words on to the younger generation, to the graduates or biotechnology students who are currently studying, and what do you want to tell to them, and how do you think that they should view agriculture in biotechnology?
I feel this is something that I have to think about. Yeah, okay. Right. Um, when you graduate with your degree, it doesn't mean that when you graduate with a certain degree, you have to really work in that field. Most of the time, people don't really do it. But the idea and the knowledge that you got in the university should guide you through what you want to do in life. Like for instance, if you're in the field of plant science, you're not entirely gonna do DNA or metagenomics on plants in when you go out to the industry. High chances is that you will have to adapt and you have to learn a lot. And if you have to work hard for it, you have to. I mean, agriculture is a field that is labor intensive. I would say it requires hard work, but then it
Yeah.
is also a very fulfilling job if you ask me. Um, you don't, of course, we, we are still at a level where farmers are using traditional methods to produce food. And if you can basically work on ideas, on research ideas that can improve the livelihood, improve how we farm our food safely and responsibly, that
Mhm.
is one of the most noble jobs in Malaysia. I mean, we can talk about noble jobs like being a doctor or being an engineer also. But if you can make changes to people's life and you can make changes into how we feed the nation, of course now we talk about the pandemic, we have to be
Yeah.
more we have to be more um like independent when it comes to food production. But if you can contribute to that, know, that is noble itself, you ask me. And the young generation must know how to see the field of agriculture as not as a work like for people who do not have money or people who didn't study. To
True.
talk about agriculture, a lot of my friends who are accountants, who are engineers, who are people in the top management, quit their job to work in the farm and working as in the field of agriculture, and that is more fulfilling for them. So, with such kind of ideas and such kind of examples that we see, of course, I will ask you to go for what you love, but
Yeah.
feeding the people the right way, safely and responsibly, that for me is a very, very noble profession.
Yes, yes.
Thank
And
you.
you heard it here from Dr. Chiu actually. It's okay to be a farmer. You don't need a glamour job. You do not
Yeah,
need to
I,
be in
I
lab. You
personally,
do not need to be white collar. Yes.
I personally, if you ask me, I can take a time off 1 year. I would
Hmm.
do agriculture. It's actually quite nice. And if you ask me, I mean, salute to all the farmers out there who feed us.
Yes.
During pandemic, you still get food,
True.
and that
True.
is important. I guess we see the importance of agriculture now more than ever.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, so that's all the time we have for today. And I really thank you very much, Dr. Chiu, for sharing your
Welcome
knowledge and
to share
insights.
some ideas with you
Yeah,
all.
yeah, thanks a lot. And for those of you whose questions that was not answered or would like to get in touch with Dr. Chiu, feel free to get in touch with her at blinchew@usm.my. I guess we will be sharing it in our comment section. And for
Mhm.
those of you who joined late or missed this session, you can watch the edited video on our MYBIOSA YouTube channel after this. And we would like to hear your feedbacks also. So please fill in the feedback form that we will also share in the comment section. And next week, we'll be joined by Mr. Jiva Kupusamy, who will be speaking on genetics, breeding, and nutrition in aqua farming. So for more updates regarding this webinar series, like and follow us on our Facebook page, Instagram, and LinkedIn page. Search for Malaysia Biotechnology Students Association or MYBIOSA. That's MYBIOSA. And yeah, thanks again a lot to all of you, and thanks to Dr. Chiu for joining us. And we hope you stay safe and take care. All right, and see you next week.